panelists.
Hi, everyone. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Bonnie, and I am moderating today's panel discussion as the trainee lead of the Institute of Gender and Health. It is a great pleasure to welcome you and to introduce our expert panelists and women's health research leaders, Dr. Lisa Galea, Dr. Lori Brotto, and Dr. Rulon Parekh. So Dr. Lori Brotto is a psychologist and a full professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of British Columbia, where she holds a Canada Research Chair in Women's Sexual Health and is the Director of UBC Sexual Health Research. Her research primarily focuses on developing and testing psychological and mindfulness-based interventions for women with sexual desire and arousal difficulties and women with chronic genital pain. She is a practicing clinical psychologist and the executive director of the Women's Health Research Institute, a real and virtual organization dedicated to facilitating and building a community for women's health research in BC. Dr. Lisa Galea is a neuroscientist and the inaugural Women Mind Tree Living Family Chair in Women's Mental Health and senior scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. Dr. Galea is a world-renowned expert in sex hormone influences on brain and behavior. Lisa leads the Women's Health Research Cluster, an international network of multidisciplinary professionals that collectively strive to create a future where women and girls can live equitably healthy lives across their lifespan. And last but not least, Dr. Rulon Parekh is a practicing nephrologist and the Vice President Academics at Women's College Hospital, where she leads advancement of the hospital's goals to build sustainable world-class research, innovation, and education. Dr. Parekh is an international leader in clinical epidemiology and translational research in kidney disease and a professor of pediatrics and medicine at the University of Toronto. All three of our panelists and the Women's Health Research Institutes that they lead belong to the Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada, also known as POWER, that we heard a little bit about this morning, an alliance dedicated to achieving better health for all women, trans, and non-binary people through research equity, excellence, and inclusion. The Women's Health Research Cluster and POWER are delighted to be co-convening this trainee research conference and to kicking off this expert panel. So let me get started by asking Lisa and Lori, what advice would you give to your younger self about starting a career in the women's health field?
Who wants to go first? You said Lisa and Lori. Does that mean I get to go first? And Lori, you're still muted. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here joining you. I'll just very quickly, I don't know, I wrote down 4 pieces of advice, but I don't think I have that much time to give you 4 pieces of advice, but I'm sure we can get to more of it later if we have more time. But I'd say the first piece of advice I'd give you is, and it's not specific to women's health, it's just that, maybe I'll give it to you. There are many pathways to success. So what I learned really early in my career is that I get advice from somebody and then I'd ask somebody else because I'm just that type of person. And I would get, maybe advice A from person 1 and advice minus A from person 2. And so I learned pretty early that there are many different ways that you can get to where you want to go. And so if you are asking for advice and something doesn't seem right to you, just ask somebody else. And maybe you'll ask enough people that you'll get the advice that you want and need. That's my big piece of advice. Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that. And my response is going to be so similarly. It's like preparing yourself for a journey that does not have a single map. It's, it uses several developing maps that are continually changing and evolving and are drawn up by the people who are just a few years ahead of you. The other students, your mentors, those in your field that you're learning from and working with. Maybe a piece of advice based on my own experience is that this career in women's health it's so much more than identifying a research question and following the traditional steps of the scientific method to answer that question. So had I known how difficult it was to secure funding, I may have been less hard on myself when I didn't get funding. Or had I known how important relationships were, such as relationships with clinicians and patients and community groups and government allies and so many others, I probably would have started sooner in that relationship building. And I also wish I knew how rewarding it would eventually be, and especially as someone who has the great privilege of offering clinical care to women, and in my case, women with sexual problems and genital pelvic pain. When I'm able to sit in the clinic and share information from the published literature to a person who is sitting in front of me in tears, who has shared stories of being dismissed and misunderstood and told it's all in her head, and to see the life-changing impact that validating women's concerns, listening to them and offering them evidence-based information. It's directly from the science that you all are doing. It's just a real privilege and honor, and helps me really get through the months and years of difficult funding and et cetera. So that would be my advice, is prepare for a journey with no map.
Yeah, and speaking of difficult funding and other challenges, I'd love to hear more about the challenges you've encountered as you progress throughout your career, and what has been most important for helping you overcome these challenges.
To Lori and Luann.
Yeah, to Lori.
Do you want me to go first? Okay. So maybe just a little bit about how I came to UBC. I had actually accepted a position at the University of Washington in Seattle, in a really well-known, well-funded academic health center. And the main reason I left was because colleagues in my field of sexuality research were being threatened by a very loud group of activists who lobbied the NIH to defund already funded research teams in the United States who were doing research on sexuality. And the concern was about the negative impacts of sex research on the family. And so as a beginning researcher myself, I was really worried about not being able to secure funding. And so I left that position and I came to UBC. Really glad I did, of course. But what I did not realize was that the threat of funding to sex research that I was seeing in the US was totally mirrored by the threat to funding or the lack of funding in women's health research that I experienced in Canada. So I feel like I was somewhat being doubly targeted, both as a women's health researcher and as a sex researcher. There was a period in my academic career, about 5 years into my appointment, when I was outside of the window of available funding as an early career researcher, and I hit a dry spell. My budgets were running out. I had to reduce my staff, and I actually had a meeting with my department head and gave notice that I was going to be leaving my academic job. And when another senior colleague in the department learned about this, she offered to give me some bridge funding to tide me over until I could secure the next grant, which was an incredible, just incredible act of generosity and really steered the direction of my career. I stayed in academia. I was able to eventually get the grant. And so I really learned the incredible value of supporting junior colleagues and mentorship. And since then have really tried to pay it forward by offering advice, sometimes unsolicited, wherever I could.
Thank you so much. And speaking of that, thank you for being here today and sharing with our trainees your pieces of advice. How about Roland? We'd love to hear from you as well. What kind of challenges have you encountered, and what is important for learning to overcome those challenges?
So I think that the thing that I've learned is you have to recognize that getting grants, getting papers, all of these things sometimes challenge us, and that you shouldn't take it personally. You're actually using it as a growth or an opportunity to actually grow and learn. And I think one of the things I would say is it's really important to have that growth mindset when you're thinking about academic medicine and clinical care and research, in that you're ready to take on those challenges and you're willing to keep going back, and you're willing to keep persisting, and really because you're passionate about the topic and you really want to make a difference. And so I think that passion, persistence, and perseverance are really, really important traits that you need to have to be able to keep going at it, right? And recognize that you have to know what that question is that you want to answer and what you want to do, because that's really the reason you're there. And just keep going for it, and don't let people dissuade you that it's not important, that it's not valued, and how you're approaching it is not right. Sometimes you have to definitely sort of wiggle around certain things, but you're always moving forward. You're just moving straight. And I think that's something that you need to think about. And one of the things that I tell people is there's a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit. And I think it's a great book to read because it talks about flow and practice, and that you need to become an expert at something, which we all feel that we need to become an expert at. And then you have flow once you really reach your 10,000 hours. But what she also writes about is non-catastrophic failure. And I think that we have repeated, episodes of these non-catastrophic failure, and that's actually good because you grow and you learn, and it's okay. Like, it's totally okay. And I think people have to be ready to accept that occasionally things are not going to work out. But, the next time it could work out, and it could be really big and have a massive impact. And so you have to think about those things and sort of not give up. And so I think having grit is really, really important. And I think willing to persist at something and persevere and be passionate about it is really important. And so don't let people dissuade you from that. You just really need to keep that as your North Star and recognize what's really important to you, and just, keep at it. And so when you get dissuaded or when you get discouraged, what's really important is talk to people and recognize that you're not in it alone, that you do have your mentor, but you do have work friends, and you do have sponsors, and you do have people who are going to nominate you to things. And those are the kind of people you form this network, this team that kind of helps support you to say that you're on the right track. And that's really the group that you should use. Sometimes people think that there's only one mentor. And I think probably you have a group of mentors and a group of people who support you. And you need to think about using that kitchen cabinet that are really going to help you move forward and develop that and nurture that. And so I think that's something that's really helpful also to keep you going, especially when times are challenging. And times will be challenging because there's always something going on that's unexpected. And, we've all survived the pandemic, and, and now we're dealing with fires in BC, Ontario, and Quebec. And, somebody was asking us about fires in the operating room or smoke in the operating room. Like, we're always dealing with something new and challenging. It's just different every time. And so I think just recognize that that's just the way of the world at the moment, and things will change, and you just got to learn how to go with it and use it as an opportunity to learn and think about something differently.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of that, this is a great segue to our next question, which is, can you give us an example of a mistake you've made in your career, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I think I made several mistakes. I don't think I could just give one. But what I will tell you is that I read a book. I read a lot of books because I'm actually sort of interested in thinking about things. And I think one of the books that I read recently was a book by Sally Helgesen, which is called How Women Rise. And it has the 12 things that women typically do. And I went, oh, look, I do all 12. Great. And so, and I could tell you that I did all 12 during that time. And so one of the things was, I think this is common for most women, is that we feel that when people ask us to do things, that we're not an expert in that area, and we need to become the expert, and we need to have the skills to do it. And we are uncomfortable sort of leaping at something when we might only have half the skills, or we might not know that we actually have the skills, but you think you don't have the skills. And so I think that imposter syndrome comes front and center a lot. And I think what we need to do is overcome that and be willing to take a challenge and take a risk and do something that maybe it doesn't work, or it does work, but you're still going to learn from it. And so I think it's really important that people go forward and try those different things. So the mistakes that I made, they're all in that book if anybody wants to read it. But in addition, I think what I did was I relied on my work, my hard work, my productivity to speak for itself. And I didn't spend my time doing the networking that I needed to do. And I think what happened was that I relied too much on one part or one aspect of my career, and not too dissimilar to what Lori said, right? Like, you need to meet those different people and connect with those different people, because you don't know who's going to suddenly help you or have an opportunity. Like Lisa just said, hey, you want to work on something with me? And we just worked on it a couple of weeks ago, and it's great. But it's like, you just don't know who you're going to meet and who you're going to talk to and who's going to be your next collaborator. And so I think it is really important to network and to do much more. And so when an opportunity was given to me to have leadership, I felt like, oh, I don't have enough experience in that. I don't know what I'd be doing. And so there were a couple opportunities that I think, wow, I gave up early opportunities at leadership, and perhaps that would have changed my trajectory slightly in different ways. And perhaps I should have taken that risk, and I was reluctant to. And so what I would tell all of you is that sometimes, when a door opens, it's okay to take a leap. Like, it's all right. And you don't have to be so worried about it not working out, that things will happen and you will learn from it. And so even if it isn't the best job, like it's okay. Like, and Lori gave the example of she's going to Seattle and a whole load of stuff changed out of her control. All of these things happen all the time. So you just have to be willing to take a jump and decide that in general, it's a good idea, and be willing to take that risk.
Yeah. And Lisa, do you have an example you can give us as well?
I mean, yeah, there are again many. I mean, I've made tons of mistakes in my life. They are all opportunities, though. Actually, I didn't write this one down as something to say, but I think in response to what Rulan just said, I think it's kind of interesting. So I did a master's with somebody, and it just wasn't really working out really well. I mean, I did end up finishing my master's with that particular person, but it was really, really challenging. And at one point, I just wanted to quit. And I was talking to my mother, and she said, was encouraging me not to quit, just keep at it. And I said, but Mom, I'm not learning anything. And she said, that's not true. You're learning how not to be a mentor. And I thought, wow, that's like reframing things in your mind sometimes is a really valuable tool. So what I wrote down was to say, you know, a mistake I certainly still listen to sometimes is that voice in your head telling you that you're not good enough, which also I think touches on what Rulan was also saying as the theme, right? We all have imposter syndrome. If somebody tells you they don't, I don't believe it for a second. I think some people have some tools that they use to not show that imposter syndrome is there, but it is alive and well. And I think part of that is seeking perfection. And I think women tend to do this a little bit more. You know, we, as Rulan said, we want to be like 100%. We don't apply for jobs because we're not 100% fill out all of that criteria that's in that job description. But that shouldn't stop us from applying for things, that we are taking that leap, taking that opportunity. And the other thing that I read very recently, which caused some reflection, was that there are mentors, right? You need to have that network. I really love that. Again, I was too slow in developing that network. But understand that some people around you, and I learned this a little later on in my career, was when I was offered an opportunity and I asked people about this opportunity, I had some team mentors, some people that sort of worked to not get me to accept some of those opportunities. And it took me a while to figure that out. But you know, establishing that network and making sure they're not mentors is a really important tool, and try not to make that same mistake.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And on all three of your responses so far, I think it's really encouraging for trainees to hear that even so far along your career and as experts in the field, you deal with these really relatable issues as well, such as imposter syndrome. And so on that, what are some skills or knowledge you think young women's health professionals should cultivate now to best prepare them for a career in women's health research? And we can start with Lisa on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've got like a real science one, and then I have two other ones. How should I put it? So one would be just to be open, which I actually think somebody else has said too. I think it might have been Rulan or Lori, I can't remember, both. You know, be open, because there's so much to learn from so many different disciplines, and just having that willingness to listen to other people and disciplines, even if it might not be exactly what you are interested in, I think is really great, because what happens, it also develops your network a little bit more, allows you to grow in many ways. So I think that being open is a really good skill to develop. You know, going to some random seminar in a conference that you might not have necessarily sat in, or at your university or academic institution. I think knowing how to analyze, this is my science bit, is really, really important. So I would encourage all the trainees out there to do, you know, there's all sorts of free statistic stuff online. You know, any kind of big data, I think, is also great, even if that's not what you want to do, just learning about it and learning what artificial intelligence is. I think those are kinds of pieces of information, because you never know how that's going to reflect on your career. And then the last, not really a skill, so maybe I'll leave that one for my important takeaways. So I'll just leave it.
All right. And Lori or Rulan?
Yeah, I would say communication training is, especially in women's health, which is just chock full of misinformation and disinformation online. So if your university or institution offers media training, take it. learn how to extract the key messages from your work, know how to give the 30-second, the 3-minute, and the 30-minute pitch, have them in your pocket ready to go. And then I would say also try and understand the bigger context of the work that you do. How does your particular question fit within bigger questions or related questions? So as an example, in my area of sexual dysfunction, really about developing treatments for sexual dysfunction, it's also really important for me to understand, the impacts, the economic impacts of having a sexual dysfunction or managing genital pain, impacts on fertility, impacts on relationship. And so having these, knowing the sort of connecting the dots between your particular area and other areas of health or well-being that maybe the public is also interested in. And then finally, so if you have opportunities to practice giving your pitch, whether to a public audience or if a foundation knocks on your door and asks you to present, I know a lot of you are on social media, TikTok, can you give your pitch in 8 seconds? And that really forces you to extract the key findings. I do think it's really important that we as scientists and researchers get into that online space, because the non-scientists are already out there sharing sharing disinformation. So that would be my encouragement.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Rula?
So I think in terms of skills, I do think like we really talked about mostly soft skills. So I think I agree with Lisa, like some of the hard skills, like think about team science, recognize what your immediate skills that you learned, but what do you think the future is going to hold so that you're at least skilled and understand, and recognize that really the big breakthroughs happen with team science. And so what would have been acceptable 10, 15 years ago, where it's the one lab, one person in the lab and everything's related to that one person, now we expect there to be more team science and more open science. And so it should become skilled at those kind of things. But it's really the soft skills that are going to enable you as you move forward to be able to balance all the things that you need to be able to think about work life. I call it imbalance. I don't think it's ever balanced. I think you sort of choose different things at different times. But it's the whole skills about, how do I answer this scientific question, and then I sort of say, so what? And then I have to now tell the story. So just like Lori said, you've got to become skilled about telling the story scientifically for your peers. You have to be able to tell the story for knowledge dissemination and for the lay person. And you've got to be able to communicate really clearly about what you're doing. And that elevator pitch, it sounds so simple, but every time I meet a student and I say, so what do you do? It's like I get paragraphs and paragraphs, and I'm like, I don't know what they're really doing. And I think that I can't help you, or when somebody comes to speak to me, I just need to know, what are you doing? So then I can say, hey, these are the great things that you can do. And I can help you with that. That would be really interesting. Let me connect you. But if I can't understand what you're doing, then it's really hard for me to be able to do that next step for you when I meet you. And I think that's one of the big things that everyone has trouble with. And I try to have my lab people not memorize it, but really write it out so that they can practice. And that's really an important thing that you can do. And networking, we always talked about, I think this idea also about sponsorship. So you have a mentor, but people will sponsor you for things. And I think it's thinking through, what are you being sponsored for? To review journal articles, to get onto a journal, to get on to become a speaker at a scientific meeting, all of these kind of things. So people need to know who you are, and you need to be present. And I think what's hard now is we're being asked to be present now, not just virtually, but also in person. And so I feel like we've got double the work going on, right? And that becomes complicated for people, especially if you've got young families. And so learning how to figure out that timing, I think, is something that people need to figure out in this world of hybrid, about what you can and cannot do, and trying to understand how to navigate that. And I think I'll leave it there for the moment, but those are sort of the takeaways. And I'd say go back to that book about the 12 steps. There are 12 things that you could learn, and they're all soft skills.
That's great. And again, opening up to all panelists, what are the most important takeaways you would say so far from your career in the women's health field? Anyone?
I'll do my edit. I'll do it. I'll jump in.
All right.
They're going to take away the great points, because I've already I think we've touched upon a number of areas, and Rulan just mentioned one that was going to be the thing that I said, oh, I'm going to save it, and that is don't. And this is not really science-wise. I think it's just a rule for life anyway, and that is don't seek a work-life balance. It sounds like a great thing to seek and have, but there's no such thing. So probably the best advice I got when I first started, because I asked about, well, how do you achieve it? Somebody who was about 10 or 15 years ahead of me, and she said there's no such thing, and it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes, you have a grant due or a paper revisions or something, and you just can't pay attention to all the other things going on in your life. You've got to get that thing done. And then there'll be another time period where someone unfortunately will be sick in your family and you can't do your work thing, and that's fine. That's just riding a roller coaster of life, and understanding that it's kind of an impossibility to seek that balance. So I would say don't seek it. Don't be too afraid of failures, because failures always tell us information, right? And follow your passion. If you're passionate about it, I mean, I know it's trite, but it does work. If you're passionate about something, you will never feel like a burden.
I'm happy to go next. Mine's really short and sweet, and that is you're making history. So really, with only a 20-year history of women routinely being included in clinical trials, with so many areas of women's health never studied, never funded, with so little information on the unique sex and gender aspects of certain conditions, it really is an amazing opportunity to make the next major discovery and be part of that history.
I would say have fun. Like, this is a great career. Like, I actually think you get to do all sorts of great, fun stuff. It's never boring. It's never the same. There's always something happening. And I would just say, I think that all of you have chosen what I think is a great area to go into. And I think that there's so much work that needs to be done. Really just enjoy yourself and have fun. And you are never going straight, but you're always moving forward, and that's good. And I think you're always challenging people and advocating and making change and having impact. And I think that's really, really important. And so we want you all to stay in this area. We want you to really continue to advocate for women's health. We want you to advocate for more women researchers and more diverse researchers, and be an ally to people who you see who have a struggle or have not had the opportunities. And I think that it's enjoy yourself and really recognize that there are difficult times, but if you see it as an opportunity and reframe it, as we've all talked about, I think that you guys will have a great time and just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you. And I mentioned in the chat already, but if you do have any questions for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand, unmute, go on your video and ask a question, or you can leave them in the chat and I can ask them for you. And while we wait for, yes, go ahead.
Can I say one thing? I think it is important, obviously, I think it's important to have fun, but there are going to be some points where are not fun. So I'm just like a boring example of that is you get reviews back, or, maybe written an editorial and they pick out that you don't like, you really liked it and you want to put it back. I don't know who would have done that.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I would say. Like, I actually think, I used to take them so personally, but somebody gave me some great advice. And that was, you get those reviews and you print them out 3 times. And the first one, you stand all over it, stamp all over it, and just swear a lot, and then throw it out. And the second one, you crumple it up, you read some of it, you crumple it up, you're so irritated, you throw it out again. And by that point, you're kind of calm. Maybe it's a couple of days later, then you read the third one and you take a look at it. Everyone goes through that. Everyone takes grant reviews personally. Everyone gets irritated.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's, what? I see it as, it's not a life and death thing. It's irritating. No. So it's a growth opportunity. And you're like, all right, I didn't explain it properly. Some of it is luck. Some of it is, and so it happens and you just got to keep going. I had a friend who, I was junior faculty at Hopkins, and I had just done my first NIH Career Mentored Award, and I didn't get it. And I went and I cried on his shoulder and I was like, feeling sorry for myself. And he goes, listen. And he opens up this drawer that just looked enormous, this file drawer. And he goes, these are all the grants I haven't gotten. I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, and you're complaining about one. Got it. I got it. I'll just keep quiet. I was like, I'll keep quiet. And so I think the thing is that everybody goes through this. And so you just need to learn how to not take it personally. And it's not you as the person. It's
But I would say I
a
still
random grant reviewer. You know what I mean?
personally, it still pisses me off. But what I try to do is I have a different coping strategy. I haven't put it out 3 times, but I think that's a good one. And you're absolutely right. We shouldn't take it personally, but I still do because I'm, cotton-headed ninny nuggets. I don't know. But I will have a pity party for myself for, like you said, like go and cry. I don't necessarily go and cry. I'll walk the dog. I'll be mad. I'll be angry.
Yeah.
I'll cry. I'll do whatever. 24 hours. I give myself 24 hours. And then I set to like, okay. And I do sometimes answer it with like, well, you idiot. If you didn't think about it, and then one, don't push send.
Yeah.
Don't push send. But then once I calm down, I can start analyzing the problem at hand.
I've always wanted to do a grant review or grant resubmission with a little bubble about this is what I'm really thinking in the sentence that I really you know what I mean? And it was like kind of hidden there somewhere, or I wanted to do something that was like same with journal review articles, right? Like, or like when you're sending back reviews back, like
We should do that.
Just don't accidentally upload
yeah,
the wrong
don't
copy.
send it. In fact, do it on a completely sheet of paper and don't copy and paste and don't put an email and don't blind copy. Yeah.
I just saw something, it was a TikTok thing or something, but it was on Instagram about what women say, but what they really mean. And like,
Yeah, that's exactly it, right?
That's what we need. We need to do that, but for grant
Well,
review.
thank you so much for these insightful comments. What we really want to say is something completely different. But it's okay. Like, I think that's the thing. I think when I stopped taking it so personally, I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, it's a grant. It's okay. We're used to it. And to be honest, it makes you resilient. And when I see people, especially during COVID, and there was resiliency issues about people being challenged, or what was interesting was I think a lot of the scientists are like, we're used to being told things all the time. And so you actually become pretty resilient at recognizing like what's really meaningful to you in your North Star and like what you value. And so that you don't get so distracted by all that other stuff, right?
Exactly.
I see we have a question from Catriona, if you want to unmute and ask.
Hi there. Thanks, everybody. This has been kind of touched on already, but I think maybe elaborating a little bit, going to a slightly darker place. How have you dealt with toxic people who are in positions of power that are like basically trying to, like the anti-mentor, trying to thwart you and
sometimes I've left the institution. That's a little drastic. You might not be able to do that every time. Going around people, trying to not take it personally, but when they are anti-mentors, the way I've dealt with it is by trying to go around the situation, like trying to find another path. And sometimes it meant for me, and I'm sure other people have other ideas, but sometimes it meant for me to take on more than I really wanted to take on. So when I was talking about that opportunity, I took one on and I thought I was going to get something taken off my plate, and it didn't get taken. So an anti-mentor just said, no, you can't do that. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's going to add to my plate, but I want to push past. And to be honest, that opportunity did lead to more things. So I think it was the right decision at the end of the day. And if it wasn't, if it hadn't moved that way, I don't know that it would have hurt me too badly. I just would have realized, oh, that's too much for me. But yeah, that's what because it's some people are so toxic you can't really do too much except for sidestep them. Try to carve them out, but that's sometimes not possible, or sidestep them.
Yeah, that's an awful situation to be in, and not directly answering the question, Katrina, but just want to really highlight the importance of your mentorship circles. And so, I belong to a mentorship group that meets once a month of other female faculty who are not in my department, who have no bearing on my promotion and awards. And it is a complete cone of silence place where we can just completely support one another and share story instances like this. And sometimes, it's a source of great insights. It's also a source of great validation as well. So if those types of mentorship circles don't exist, ours doesn't exist in a formal way. We just pulled it together. I'd encourage you to seek to create one.
Yeah, I was just going to say something like you need to create allies that you have that are trusted people that you can go to really talk about it and really get some face validity about like your concerns and are they right, are they wrong, and you really need to get that feedback. Sometimes then you need to actually deal with the person itself directly, and that's really hard and really complicated. And that I've done actually sometimes in support with HR, and really sitting down and asking them, so, this is my perception of what you're doing. I don't think that's what you intend. However, this is how I'm taking it. And that was actually great. HR gave me a bunch of tools to use and sort of to talk to them. Sometimes though, if you're at a training that somebody hired, you may feel vulnerable. There may not be that you can actually approach something a certain way. And what I think is important is that you really have to then think about strategies about talking to other people, especially if you're in the middle of your PhD or you're trying to finish it, or you think that somebody's putting a barrier. I think it's important to figure out how you can address that directly, but probably bring in other people to support you and talk to you about that. I think that is one of the hardest things if you're on your own, and trying to make sure that you should gather a group to help you is the biggest thing going forward. And work with friends. It's so much more fun when you work with friends.
Thanks.
And we have a few people who also have questions, I think. Feel free to go ahead.
I think Leonette had a question.
Oh, I don't think we can hear you.
Can't hear you though, if you're talking.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great, sorry. So great conversation, guys. I love the discussion. This is more so geared towards Lori. She brought it up, but if anybody could answer it. I have 3 questions, 2 about anti-LGBT efforts, and then my last question is what role do men play in this discussion? So for Lori, I said, in recent times, we see anti-LGBT legislation globally and pride protests locally here in Toronto, particularly where I'm located. Can you talk a little bit more about how the political landscape affects research and healthcare? So you spoke about how that affected your grant. And then how can our research have impactful change to counteract anti-LGBT policies? So those are the 2 questions for the LGBT Pride Month question. And then my question, another personal one, is what role do men play in these discussions on women's health, seeing that when I enter these rooms, usually one of one or one of one of one of one, when it comes down to intersectionalities of things. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for being here. And, I think your presence answers the second question. And that is, as women's health researchers, we also have to make room for men, gender diverse people, allies, other people who really have an important voice in this. And so thank you for being here. Yeah, I think, your first question around, first of all, the atrocities that are happening around anti-LGBTQ plus populations and the very appropriate protests that are ensuing is I think it's really inspiring to see those protests, but it's also very disheartening to know that they're necessary given given the legislation. And we can think of countless other examples, threats to reproductive justice that are not just threats in the US, but are threats to us in Canada. And for me, as someone who does research within these circles, it really speaks to the importance of, I think what I touched on in my first question is your relationships. And I know when I was first told as an early academic, pick up your phone, call your MP, know your MLA, make sure they know your name, make sure they know where you live. I sort of dismissed that at the beginning, and over time, and especially as I took on a leadership role and actually saw firsthand the importance of having those connections to government, municipal, provincial, federal, then I started doing that much, much more, and especially around election time. And so for students, I would say the same thing. Make sure your local representatives know the importance of the work that you do, so that when they go to their tables, they have those stats and figures on hand and can lobby. Make sure that you're voting, make sure that everyone votes, and vote for people who support equity, who support science. There's a underway on the next president of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. I don't know what input we're all going to have, but this also is going to be an important vote that could steer the future of funding in equitable women's health, et cetera. So I think, knowing your political landscape and not being afraid to make those connections would be really important. I'll stop there and maybe turn it to Lisa and Rulan about the second question.
Being an ally, I think you're doing the right thing. I mean, thank you. And I know, I think having you here and listening is super important, and having you voice how to be an ally. It's one of the best things we can do for any kind of anti, bias that you can do, is to be an ally. It works a lot better than anti-bias training, apparently, is allyship. So just recognizing injustice, speaking up around it. I don't do LGBTQ or 2S LGBTQ research, but recently we looked at CIHR grants. It's coming out, it should be coming out really soon, biology of sex differences. And of course we wanted to look at it from a women's health perspective, which we did, but we also looked at it from a 2S LGBT2 perspective, because what I was going to write about that was about, having the data to support that actually this isn't true. LGBTQ parents are just as good as, opposite sex parent, just ridiculous stuff like that comes out in those political. It's really hard to talk about some of this, absolutely, but in science circles, it's not just in science circles, it's just so important to talk about it anyway. But scientists generally listen to data, and eventually politicians will listen to data and evidence. And so it's just not necessarily being afraid, but doing it at your own pace too, I think is also important. And, sort of, I don't want to, knowing when to speak up and when maybe just sit back and listen, I think is also, that's challenging. I mean, I find it really, really challenging often in this space. But I'm also really willing to listen to not all perspectives, but most perspectives, understand where people are coming from. That's another thing, just sometimes very valuable to sit back and take a listen. But getting the data and speaking up and being an ally, I think is just great. Even just standing there. I think one of the best things for an ally is just to stand in between the accuser and the person, not even necessarily saying anything, just even if you don't stand in between, you just stand beside. Rulan, I bet you have some great things.
I was just going to say, I think of women's researchers and women in general really understand the need for being an ally and raising awareness about equity deserving communities, right? And I think that it's a natural allyship and alignment, and we want to advocate for everybody. And so I'd say everything that Lori and Lisa said, advocacy and allyship, super important, and we just need to keep at it. About you being here, I think all men who do research in science should be also women's health researchers. I think that our advocacy that we're going to go forward, the three of us have been talking about, is we really want people to, when you study Alzheimer's, that you study it by sex, that you address these kind of issues that are going on, and you need to study by sex and gender, right? And so I think that that's something that we want everybody to do. So I'm glad that you're here. 1%, we need another 99% to come and join us. And the idea is that we really advocate for them. And I think what I've realized is a lot of people think about women's health and they kind of put it in like it's an other sort of group. And I think what we need to say is it's so vital because it's everybody who's out there. So when you think about heart disease, when you think about Alzheimer's, when you think about multiple sclerosis, when you think about rheumatologic disorders, when you think about kidney disease, there's no reason why everybody who does research is not also a women's health researcher. And I think it's trying to get that advocacy. And so we clearly have a long way to go, but I think that it can change in the way that we've talked about data is necessary from the Black community, from the Indigenous communities. And then, so we just keep advocating that we need data. And so ultimately it'll happen. We just got to keep pushing.
Can I just say one other thing is it takes a village. So we need you, right? You need us, we need you. Like, I think if we can link, I know it's very kumbaya of me to say that, but linking arms and being together, I think is really, really important because that's how we're going to get further together.
Yes, absolutely. And it is time to wrap up the panel discussion, but of course, these are really important discussions that we're happy to have continue online and offline and in our future events. And so if everyone can just join me in giving a virtual applause to all our panelists today. And thank you again so much for your time, Lisa, Lori, and Rulan. And with that, I'll pass it back to Catherine to introduce our next session.
Thank you all. We're just going to take away the spotlight.